Hello, and welcome to my sixth feature film. I originally said that I was going to take a break, but I decided to keep on going. This film is called Yelk, and it's a Western film. Our story takes place in Yelksville, which is where we are right now. Yelksville is quite a colorful place. Basically, there are jelly beans of all sizes and colors. Anyway, and we will learn the story of a jelly bean cowboy and how he will ultimately end crime once and for all. Anyway, so sit back and relax and enjoy the story of Yelk. So, Yelksville is a place, a fictional place in fact. This is where the jelly bean residents will live in. The jelly bean residents lived in Yelksville, and it was a western town located in the middle of nowhere, or nowhere to be seen, or somewhere that was pretty unheard of. Yelksville was practically a nowhere town. They had barely any water, and things were always pretty dry and hot in the desert. They indeed lived in the desert, and there was lots of cactus and cacti, and barely any clouds, and the sky was always orange. Nonetheless, everyone got peacefully together in Yelksville. No one really got into fight, but there was quite a lot of crime in Yelksville. So much crime that the sheriff had to even call an emergency and to end all crime once and for all. The sheriff was indeed a pretty good leader in Yelksville, and he had a trusty sidekick named Yelk. Yelk was an orange cowboy. He wore big white shoes that bended at 90 degrees, and he wore a black hat. He was the most zaniest of all the cowboy characters you could ever meet, and all the ones that are indeed cartoons and fictional. You may have seen cowboys like that master scene before, but never have you witnessed something like Yelk before. A jelly bean oddity. Nonetheless, Yelk was quite a good hero in Yelksville, and he also had family. He basically had a wife and a crush and a romantic interest with Yelka, a white jelly bean with red freckles, and she also had hair and a flower in her hair. About a white lily, if you want to call it that. A 5-pound flower with the center being yellow. And that was her nature. She was charming and beautiful, and all the boys in Yelksville really wanted to be with her. They all wanted to be her date, but she chose Yelka because Yelka loves heroes, and Yelk was a perfect hero and a perfect match for Yelk. They also had a son. His name was Yelk Jr. He was a very round jelly bean, and he wanted to grow up like his father. He wanted to grow up to be a cowboy one day, just like Yelk wanted to. He always dreamed every day of being a cowboy, and that was Yelk Jr.'s biggest goal. As well, he also wanted to share that dream with his sister. His sister was named Lil Missy, and she was a white round jelly bean. Practically very short, about a giant oversized pea in fact, and that was the same for Yelk Jr. They were pretty friendly to each other, and they all went to cowboy school in Yelksville. Cowboy school was practically school, but for those who wanted to be cowboys. Yelk, Little Missy, and Yelk Jr. were desperately wanting to be a cowboy, because Yelk was a profoundly popular character. He was a profoundly popular influence in Yelksville. Yelksville always celebrated Yelk whenever he had victories, and so he would run around knowing Yelk, and that was his catchphrase. He got that. He basically got that name. He was given the name Yelk after he howled, and the thing he would cry out for victory. But it was also his common catchphrase, and he used it everywhere he went, probably using it every day for over 4 years. And I know, 4 years is a profoundly long time for one person to say all those catchphrases, but Yelk never grew out of it. He never grew out of anything, really. Instead, he was a bit like a child, and that's what made Yelk super special and stand out amongst our cowboys. Yelk had been on countless adventures over the years, but this one was gonna be like no other. Yelk also had a horse, and he didn't necessarily have a name for his horse. But basically, he would sometimes call her Rider, because she would really ride very fast with Yelk, and together they were good sidekicks. As well, Yelk also had a pet, and called it Pup. He was a black and white dog, and he was known for being half black, half white, with spots all over him, with some parts of his body being completely in white, and others being in complete black. Nonetheless, Yelk loved all his pets and family, and loved them very much. However, but of course, one thing that Yelk always likes is the townspeople. They were kids, young and old, and jelly beans, young and old. They were kids, adults, teenagers, young and old, all living in the jelly bean universe. And the jelly bean universe was very peaceful. And to Yelksville residents, this was the only place that they did not know about. They studied the stars, but they had never really seen a place outside of their world. They had only been in the deserts for so long in fact, that they forgot what the real world would actually look like. Nonetheless, they all stood curious and wondered what the real world was going to be like. Whatever the case may be, they enjoyed living in Yelksville. It was a very peaceful and great town, and no one seemed to threaten Yelksville. However, it wasn't without enemies. For example, there were bandits all over, capers, thieves, and hoods. They were the ones that terrorized Yelksville, and Yelksville was also known to have profoundly extreme weather, like dust bowls and dust storms. Because Yelksville was incredibly dry and cracked up, no water ever seemed to come. It did rain a little bit sometime, but that was only maybe once in a few years or so, and I probably meant that as an exaggeration. Nonetheless, the weather was not the best, always sunny and hot. The winters were pretty decent, but they were still relatively warm, being about 30 degrees warmer than what a normal winter would be like. Anyway, and then we have the sheriff. The sheriff is the most trusted person in all of Yelksville. We can also consider Yelk himself too. Of all the people, the sheriff, named Sheriff Sam, was by far the most trusted person. He was a brown jelly bean, and he had a mustache, and he wore a brown top hat. He was quite literally the authority figure in all of Yelksville. He was like the president, but not really the president. He just overran all the crime. He was like the police, but the words police and sheriff have different meanings, and I honestly don't know what those meanings are. But we can call a sheriff as someone who watches crimes and decides to end crimes once and for all. I do not know much about this. Anyway, but basically the sheriff was the most respected person in all of Yelksville. Anyway, and he trusted Yelk with all his might, as he knew that Yelk was the greatest hero to ever exist in Yelksville. He was the most popular of all the jelly beans and all the cowboys that ever lived. But now we tell the story of how a simple day turns into chaos, but that chaos slowly vanishes after a long and fateful journey. Our story starts off with Yelk, and he is currently fighting a bandit. "Alright, get away, you bandit," Yelk said. "No, thank you," the bandit said. Bandits were relatively tan jelly beans, and capers were around black jelly beans. And thieves were all sorts of colors. Anyway, but Yelk was currently battling a fight with a bandit jelly bean. Yelk was already winning by mere minutes. And so, he eventually got the upper hand of him. He did not end his life, but he was handcuffed and put to jail. In Yelksville, no one was ever sentenced to death, because they thought that the death penalty was the most horrible thing that could ever happen to a jelly bean, both in the human world and in their world. Anyway, Yelk handcuffed the bandit, and he was eventually taken to the jail. The jail was practically a silver building, and it was a silver building where that was where all of the bad guys would go. Next to that was the bank, which was in golden colors. Yelksville was all colorful, and it was full of detail. For example, a barber shop was often considered to be tan. A beauty store or a salon was mostly considered pink. And there were all sorts of colors that represented Yelksville as one. Anyway. But Yelksville was also guarded by a sign that said at the very end, "Town Limits." And Yelksville was a pretty small and narrow town. There was not much to move around. However, anyone could go off limits. The town was like one straight narrow line, and that line was about 50 feet wide, and about that was about 1,000 feet long. And that was the structure of how Yelksville was created. Yelk and most of the residents lived off the town. They lived off the grid, and Yelk lived very high on a cliff. Well, maybe not a cliff, but on a hill, a mountain if you will. The mountain was not extremely high, in fact about moderately high. And from fair, that was where Yelk lived. He had a garden, and he always grew things like carrots, potatoes, and countless other foods that you might even expect in Western times. Yelk was very tranquilized of his home. He treated it with great respect, and that's what made him a good humanitarian. Anyway, but now I think I'm getting a little off topic right now. Basically, I was talking about the bandit earlier. Anyway, so the bandit was handcuffed and was brought to jail. The sheriff was very proud of Yelk, and he gave him a hero badge. Now, a hero badge was practically a fire-shaped belt. It was basically half a dome, and then on top of that, 3 little spikes. And that was how the hero badge was formed. That was how it always looked like in Yelksville. Anyway, but Yelk was given, once again, a hero badge. But Yelk had already gotten this numerous times before. He kept collections of all the hero badges he had earned from years ago. I don't know the exact number, but we'll estimate that he's been getting hero badges for 4 years, and he fights about 5 crimes. I want to say at least 10 crimes a day. Therefore, it would be 40 times 10, so 400, and then times 365 days. Yeah, 365 days. But basically, I can't really do math at this moment because I'm recording. But we'll estimate it to be around, that must have to be at least over 120,000. But you can do the math for yourself. As for me, I'm currently telling the story, and I practically have no time to do math at this point. Anyway, but Yelk was once again given a hero badge, and this is one of his prized possessions. Only he was the one that mostly seemed to get hero badges. But very rarely, some other people would get hero badges. Hero badges were badges that said the word hero on it in golden letters and in black letters. They were engraved into the metal, the golden metal of the material, and of the badge. Anyway, so Yelk received his badge, and so he took it off, and so he put it back in his house. Then he was called down by the Sheriff Sam, to discuss the latest crime report. Well, Yelk, the Sheriff Sam said, looks like crime is going up this year. I know, it seems to be growing and growing every year and year, and every decade, every week to week, month and month, and day and day, hour and hour, minute, second, millisecond, and you get the idea. Practically all time units possible. Anyway, but basically, the news was not pretty good, and they had to figure out ways to stop crime once and for all. Yelksville had been attacked countless times, about thousands, tens of thousands, or even at the very worst and extreme scenarios, 100,000 or 1,000,000. But no one in Yelksville knows the exact number, and unfortunately, Yelksville records aren't really much documented. They do not really document or archive all the crimes. They do archive the crimes, but they never do keep an exact count of all the crimes that ever happened so far. But nonetheless, Sheriff Sam is always pretty nice and he collects all the data. After he collects all the data, he decides what he wants to do. So that's what Sheriff Sam did now. While Yelk was thinking, Sheriff Sam decided to anyway, but basically he gathered up all the information that he wanted to and gave it to Yelk. And he soon found a root cause of the problem. It was actually, the threats were coming from a place called far away, called Shadyville. Shadyville was hundreds of miles away. Think of like the Oregon Trail. Like imagine going to Charlottesville, Virginia, all the way to Nebraska. So about like 1,500 miles. And if you went to Charlottesville to California, it would take at least 3,000 miles. So it's a big journey. And that was exactly the distance from Yelksville to Shadyville. Anyway, Yelk was starting to feel very overwhelmed. Thousands of miles and very little time. How was he gonna pull it off? Like, this was gonna be a tough challenge. Kind of like how it would be a tough challenge to actually make this film right now and do it in under... It would practically be impossible to do this film under an hour, because I don't really structure my films like hours. I structure them by hours and minutes. Anyway, but Yelk had very little time, and he knew that this was gonna be an urgent situation. So he went back home, and very miserably, he walked in and slumped down. "What is it, honey?" Yelka said. "Well, we have the root problem of all this crime, and all this crime is coming from a place, and it's a place called Shadyville." Yelka's eyes were stunned once she heard Shadyville. If you have good inference clues or good brain logic, then you probably know that that would not be a good place at all, because there would be a lot of crime. Think of like in the real world, it would be full of drug dealers, profanity users, and people who are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, autistic-phobic. I don't think that's actually a real word, but a better word is like ableist. Yeah, so they would do, in real world, it might have to be like they use drugs, alcohol, smoke, sexual activity, pornography. No one should be watching pornography. Anyway, I think I went too far. Anyway, but that's what Shadyville was like. Sure, pornography wasn't a thing at the time, since this was around the 1950s. But they were known for being extremely dirty and foul in their language. Something in which Yelksville did not really appreciate. Yelksville was the only town that had been there they had only been there for about 60 years or so. Shadyville was practically something new. As well, Shadyville and Yelksville were practically the closest together, and even then, that was still thousands of miles away. But whatever the case may be, Yelk decided to pack up. He informed his son and daughter, "Okay, we have to go all the way to Shadyville." "Shadyville," little Missy complained. "That's gonna be like forever." "Well, we'll have to just get used to it," Yelk said. Alright, let's go. And so, but before we actually went, it's always a good idea to pack your things when it comes to long journeys. Think of like car trips, you know? You can't really do a car trip and just not pack anything. Like you probably want to pack a few things. I mean, you don't really have to, but like, normally I will always bring things when I go on car trips. Like one time I brought Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix with me, and it was this massive blue book, and it was like so thick, and my dad was kind of angry at the book. He was literally like, who the heck wrote this? And who in the world would write something as long as this? Anyway, but yeah, it's a very, very, very long book, like almost 900 pages. Anyway, enough about that. So Yelk and his family decided to pack and pack. They packed food, as always, and Yelk also brought along his lasso. And that was the most. He treated his lasso like his best friend. Yelk also had a gun, and no, it wasn't, it's not like a gun that you would see now. It was basically guns in Yelksville are not simply called guns. They're simply called shooters. And specifically, they just shoot out jelly bean projectiles. So here's a quick story. So back in January 2022, I was actually working on an episode called Gunfight, and it literally contained actual guns, but I soon changed it. Instead of these guns fire jelly bean projectiles. However, they do not harm like real bullets do. So it's more playful. And even if someone does get hit with a jelly bean gun, then the consequences aren't really bad. They would probably experience a little blow. Nothing too serious that you would actually die or become deceased from this. Anyway, but his last item that Yelk brought was his jelly bean dish, as well as he packed along his hero badge, just to let people know that he was in Pup was left at home. Actually, that was Yelk beforehand. But now Yelk decided to carry him with him. So they need to pack food for Pup as well. The horse will also have food. Mostly just grass. But they would have some food, and they were allowed to take rest. But very quick rest, because the situation was profoundly dire. And people were constantly tired of having all these attacks all the time. You probably wouldn't like it if someone, commits violence almost every single day. And, consider the fact that we live in a world where there's, shootings 24/7. Things kind of get worse and worse over time. And that's kind of a thing I see with all this violence that happens in the world. I don't like violence. Anyway. But basically, this is now the part in which the heroes set off. So Yelk and set off. And so his journey began. He passed right through the town limits. And while he was there, he waved to all the townspeople and said, "Wish me luck. I'll be right back." Even though that right back may actually be many weeks. So, and that was where Yelk saw Yelksville for the last time, and the last time until who knows when. The journey had now officially started, and they were now a few feet away from the Yelksville town limits. They traveled and traveled for miles and miles. Anyway, they had meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, actually, they just had dinner. Basically, before then, the family had already eaten breakfast and lunch, so it was now time for dinner. At that point, they had went about 20 miles, so they were about, at that point, 0.60%. So that's not very far. It's not even 1%. And yeah, it's about 3,000 miles. So it's an incredibly long journey. I mean, it will also be very painful if you were actually walking all that time, and if you tried to run it all in that time. Heck, I don't know who did this, but one time that there was this person who ran about 200,000 kilometers, or maybe even miles, in just 24 hours. That was insane. I honestly can't do that. Seems like I can't really do cross country because I always get pretty sick after running 5Ks. Yeah, I basically almost threw up while I was doing the 5K in October 2023, and it was how do cross country kids even do this? So maybe I might give it another try, but who knows? Physical activity. I'm honestly not sure what my opinions are about it, but I sometimes like to do it for the fun. Anyway, so soon after, Yelk and family ate dinner. And for dinner, they had some stew. And Yelk did bring some cooking materials and cooking utensils along, so they wouldn't have to eat anything raw, per se. So they ate some dinner, and dinner was practically a stew filled with sliced potatoes, sliced carrots, onions, a bit of meat, and the sauce was practically like an orange sauce, not like curry per se, but probably it was kind of in the color of the sky, just like how Yelksville was kind of always orange, and orange was the main color of practically the entire town itself, and practically the entire sky, because they lived in the desert. Anyway, they soon packed up and decided to dispose of the fire that they had made. They got a bit of water, and the water was from a pipe, and the pipe was actually functioning really well. It was rather odd for that to happen, since most things in the desert don't really work. If you're trying to get water from a desert, then tough luck, kid, because that's not really gonna work. Anyway, but in this fictional world, water was actually a thing about 20 miles after the town limits of Yelksville. Anyway, but at that point, they decided to get a drink of water. And the water was nice and cold. A little warm though, but almost optimal for its time in the desert. At that point, Yelk and his family moved on out. And from there, they decided to take a sleep, and the horse decided to take a sleep too. And we'll actually call the horse Ryder, because that's her full name, Ryder. And she's a brown horse with a red nose. Anyway, but basically, They slept through the night, and the horse sort of slept. It slept for about half the time. Sometimes it would be super active, and sometimes it would stop. By the end of the night, they had traveled an additional 30 miles. So at that point, they were 1.6 infinity% done, or 1/60th of the way done. Yeah, I kind of incorporate some math in here, because it's kind of one of my favorite subjects. Anyway, but the next morning came, and the sun showed up as always. So the sun came up as always, and of course the sky was always orange too. That was just the nature of the desert, you know. It seemed like the blue skies would never even show up. It was mostly covered with dust, and Yelksville and practically the entire world was practically covered in dust. And that kind of was for most of the Jelly Bean universe. Anyway, but at that point, Yelk and his family moved on, and his horse named Ryder, who is a girl, just continued on. They had now traveled 75 miles, so at that point, about somewhere like over 2% at that point. So they eventually decide to rest, and from there, Yelk saw something in the distance. Wait, Ryder, go up a little bit. So she went up a little bit and carried the wagon with her, which also contained the family and all their belongings and food and water. Anyway, so they kept on going, and they eventually found a green building called the General Store. And this is it was called Brownsville. It was mostly known because the buildings were all brown, and it was mostly known for its brown nature. Practically, and what I mean by brown nature is that practically it was mostly wood, and brown was also most of the residents' favorite color. They liked brown a lot because of wood. Anyway, but Yelk and his family went over to the general store. And so, he went into the general store for the first time, wondering if this was gonna be any good. So he walked in, and the bell of the door rang. Oh, hello. And the general store's manager was named Mr. Green. He was a green jelly bean. So, what can I help you with? Well, we're just looking around, and that's mostly it. So basically, Yelk decided to look around. But while he was doing that, and also his family joined him as well, but while they were doing that, they heard some shots in the square. Everyone panicked and looked around. Yelk and his family rushed out and tried to join in the action. Then they saw a bandit. And I know, we don't like bandits. They always be stealing things. Anyway, but basically there was a bandit there, and quite a few bandits. Yelk got angry and decided to shout his catchphrase Yelk. And that was the catchphrase, that was his expression, and use that expression whenever he felt like it. Anyway. But basically, Yelk and his family decided to tackle the bandits one-on-one. Actually, not one-on-one, but they tackled it in a group. However, Yelk was mostly the one doing it, so it was technically like 1 versus about a dozen. So Yelk grabbed out his lasso, and he grabbed out his jelly bean shooter, and so he started attacking the bandits, not hurting them, but basically wrangling them all up and capturing them. He captured all of them, and he eventually took them to the jail in Brownsville, and the mayor was and the sheriff was so impressed that basically he got another hero badge. But this one was like a hero badge, but in a much more brown badge, like a bronze badge, and that represented Brownsville. So Yelk had gotten his first ever hero badge from an entirely new world, a world which he hadn't maybe visited before. Well, actually, he never visited before. So it felt profoundly good for him to get recognized by somewhere that he honestly hadn't been before. It's kind of like me, where I got recognized by all the Ivy League schools, but I didn't really apply or anything, didn't do anything, but all that outreach just came to me, and I became the first student at Alamo High School to get this sort of thing, and also practically, maybe even first in the state, nation, and practically in the entire world. So right then there, Yelk was getting global recognition, something that I've kind of achieved a little bit since about senior year. At that point, Yelk decided to store away his brown hero badge, his bronze one in fact. And that was where he felt most thrilled, the most passionate in his life. Anyway, soon after, they all thanked the town. He soon all thanked the town, and the town all thanked him. And so, he and his family were all off. And they were all off to see the next great thing. It was finally time to leave. And so, Yelk and his family decided to leave. And that's where he waved goodbye once again, but then he vanished and they were never to be seen again. Yelk had a little bit of a teardrop in his eye, but he felt pretty good about it. He wondered how things were going back in Yelksville. Speaking of Yelksville, at that point, crime was practically everywhere. No one knew how to be a good hero like Yelk was. Sheriff Sam was trying desperately so hard to fight off all the bandits and bad guys, crooks, thieves, bandits, capers, burglars, vandalizers. Even though they didn't have spray paint in the 1950s. Or I don't think they did, anyway. But basically, Sheriff Sam was trying so hard to practically eliminate all this crime, but it became no use. So he soon decided to go to the root of the problem. He wondered where Yelk was, but Yelk was not even 5% done with his journey. So this was gonna be a long journey, and maybe this could even be a long movie, because if he's only 5% done, and this film has been going on for 45 minutes, that means that this film would be over 15 hours long. But don't worry, I'm gonna try my best to get to the chase and try and make the story a little bit short, because I don't think you guys want to sit around for a 15-hour story. I kind of just don't have the time to do that. Anyway, but basically, Yelk and his horse and his family all continued on. They have now gone past the town limits of Brownsville, and for every city, or for every town, there's always a town limit sign. There was one for Yelksville and for Brownsville, and one for Shadyville. Anyway, but at that point, they were moving at a relatively more moderately faster pace. At this point, this is where our story gets a little bit intense. Anyway, so basically, at this point, this is where the story gets intense, and as in, the heroes may or may not ever make it. Who knows? Anyway, but basically, at that point, Yelk and his family and his horse were kind of getting tired. They were actually very famished, and that was the reason why I said that they could probably never make it to Shadyville, and practically making this story never ending. But who knows how long this story will go on for? Will it be like the never-ending story from 1984? I honestly don't know if we can go up for that long. Anyway, but basically, everyone is feeling very famished. Turns out their food was all stolen, so now they had no food and no water. It looks like they were about to die, once and for all. And this is where the story feels hopeless. And yeah. Anyway. However, they decided to look for food. They spent many miles, but the hunger was soon starting to take the toll on them. Yelk had tried very hard to try and get food, but they wanted to go to Brownsville, but that was half the distance away, and that was many miles away, so Yelk had no idea what to do. They waited all afternoon, and their stomachs were getting near empty. That night, they did not eat anything. However, a blessing was made. That was where, basically at that point, two men decided to give a very generous gift to the family and to the horse. They brought grass, tons of grass, about many pounds of food, apples, carrots, fruit, and also some desserts. So they were blessed. Yelk and his family were all dead asleep at that time, so they never really got to witness it. Anyway, when they woke up the next morning, Yelk was kind of feeling sad because he didn't know anything. He was gonna, but he was probably not gonna make it. And I had that mindset for quite a long time. That was until he saw the blessing of food, and from there he woke everyone up, and so almost immediately they decided to eat food, as they hadn't eaten it over a day. This is good, he said. Yeah, it is. Now there is hope for this story, and I think that we can finally make it to Shadyville. But that may soon be a long way away. Anyway, after they had ate, they decided that they had enough energy to go the distance. Anyway, but they decided to go the remaining distance, and the writer was really willing to do that. She felt much more satisfied now in her stomach. And at that point, she was willing to take them miles on end. And so things got really much more faster pace after that. It also started to turn it down a little bit, as it was starting to get near fall time. Anyway, there were no trees in Yelksville or in the desert, mostly cacti. So they could never really witness leaves falling, leaves dying in the winter, and leaves growing green again. And doing the same thing in summer, because nothing really changes in summer. Anyway. But what they did get to witness was the temperature and how it changed. It was starting to be relatively much more cool. And so, the fire was starting to get much more faster. At this point, they were about 10% done, and it had been about a week elapsed. But they knew that this was going to happen, that they would need a miracle to even get there. Like, to get there in like less than 2 months, like a month. So they would have to get there in extremely fast time. Anyway. Soon after, they were alright until one of the wagon wheels broke. Ah man, Yelk said, that was the only wagon wheel. He soon tried to mend it, but it was no use, and the wheel was already damaged beyond repair. Since the wheel was already damaged beyond repair, they practically had no transportation uses whatsoever at all, and it looks like the story gets hopeless again. Reason is misery. Anyway. So at that point, they could literally do nothing at all. However, he did spot something from a distance, and it looked like another general store. So basically going to the general store, as in the buy parts, but they went to the general store, and it was just like Brownsville, but this one was called Silverville. And their favorite color was silver. Practically every town had their own favorite color. Yelksville was orange. Brownsville was brown or bronze. And Silversville was gray. Somewhere in the gray spectrum, but also mostly for silver, since that's where they got their name, silver. Anyway, but Silversville. Anyway, at that point, they had made it to Silversville, well, actually just in walking distance, since it was not very much far. It was only about yards or a bit of a kilometers away, but not too intense for youngest family to walk through. So they made it to the general store, and they found a wagon wheel. However, Yelk did not have any money, but he soon found some money on the ground. And he also, he got into a contest, and from there he won some cash prizes. And so he used the cash prize to pay for the wagon wheel. And so they finally had transportation back and running up once again. Yay! Anyway, so now they had transportation back and running. So now it was about time to continue their journey. However, they decided to stop for a little bit of a tour. they spend the rest of the day in Silversville, doing activities and exploring the towns. However, they soon got a telegram, and the telegram was from Sheriff Sam, and here's what he wrote. Dear Yelk, please help us. We are in utter misery, and we can literally do nothing at all. If the fate of the world and the fate of crime depends on you. If you don't do this mission, we'll be stuck like this forever. So Yelk decided to pack everything up. He knew that he could not waste his time on doing fun activities because this was a profoundly serious and dire situation. It had been for quite a long time. So he rushed through his family, and from there, after he rushed through his family, he got them all on board and decided to take them forward. It was unclear what the next town was gonna be, but at that point, their transportation was up and running again, and they soon passed and went over the town limits of Silversville. So soon after, they went for about 100 more miles. Anyway, so this story could practically go on for like several hours. However, for the sake of time being, since I feel like you won't really be interested after 15 hours of non-stop storytelling, so I'm actually gonna skip forward a bit. So here's the chase. So practically, they went over to Goldsville, and that was the final town that they ever went to. And so they went for about thousands of more miles, and then they finally reached Shadyville. But before we get into Shadyville, it practically took 3 months to even get there. It was a profoundly long journey, and at this point, it was now about winter time, so things were incredibly cold. Anyway, and meanwhile, back at Yelksville, crime was still skyrocketing. Things were starting to be broken in Yelksville, kind of like vandalism, kind of like Pleasure Island in Pinocchio where everything gets destroyed. Anyway, but at that point, they had finally reached Shadyville. And this was now the moment that Yelk had been waiting for, but also he was very profoundly nervous for this moment. He knew that this was probably gonna be a life or death situation, and so that he didn't really want to be in this situation right now, but he had to face it if he ever wanted Yelksville crime rates to stop and vanish entirely. Soon after, they got out of the wagon and slowly walked. Shadyville was mostly filled with bad guys, and once again, they were filled with drunks, smokers, vandalisms, vandalizers, thieves, thugs. I'm not gonna say the B word, but it's that word where you describe someone that's never really married. Anyway, but I'm not gonna say that word because it's inappropriate. Anyway, but it contained things like thieves, capers, and I've already went over this list already, so I feel like I don't really need to do it again. Anyway, so they finally went to Shadyville, and everyone lit up. Who is this? Someone whispered, and yes, nobody ever really talked in Shadyville. Everyone always whispered. I'm here to see the sheriff, Yelk said. The sheriff? He's over there. Yelk made a goal. Anyway, So he went over there, and so his family followed him with him. This was probably gonna be the most suspenseful part. And this will probably be the most suspenseful part of the entire story, as this is where the climax appears. Midnight Revolution. Anyway, so at that point, they were confronted by a lot of thieves and a lot of bad guys. We'll simply call all the bad guys, practically all the residents of Shadyville, either bad guys or I forgot what the other one, but we're gonna call them villains. That was the one I meant to say. So we'll either call them bad guys or villains. So the villains were all staring at them. Anyway, I came to speak with the sheriff, Yelk said. Alright, here is the sheriff. And so, the sheriff came towards Yelk, and his name was Sheriff Blackheart, a black jelly bean. So, Blackheart said, "Is this where are you, Yelk?" "Yes, I am, sir," he said nervously. Well, what can I do for you?" They seemed to be oddly nice at first, but Yelk soon knew his instincts, and he said, "We came here to stop crime once and for all." "Crime? There's no crime here." But Yelk totally knew that they were liars. Anyway, Yelk knew that they could not trust him, and so did his family. Yelk always said, "Never trust shady people," or never trust black jelly beans. Okay, that's kind of a bit racist, but what I mean is, like, don't trust people who do bad things. So that's a better way to say that instead of saying something that's incredibly racist. Anyway. So, they confronted the sheriff, Sheriff Blackheart, in fact. And from there, they started to get into a much more intense argument. But there is no crime in Shadyville. While there is towards us, how in the world are you not getting a crime? But we are. What's your town? Yelk froze for a little bit. Yelksville. No way, Jose. I don't believe it. You say that your town, freaking Yelksville, is getting harassed. It's getting terrorized just because we keep making promises to it? Maybe? Dude. Okay, I went a little too far. But seriously, how the heck do you want us to literally stop all this crime? We're not doing anything wrong. Maybe you are, Yelk said. He actually meant as they are doing things that are extremely wrong. Alright, Blackheart said. How about you and I get into a duel? A duel? Okay. So Yelk and Sheriff Blackheart got into a duel. Yelk got out his jelly bean shooter. However, Blackheart got out his deadly shooter. One bullet, and he would be dead. So this is where either the hero dies or he may live. So let's bless him. God bless him. Anyway. And so his family were in utter shock and very sad. Was Yelk really gonna die at this moment? Well, who knows, but this is where the story gets the most intense, and this is where the drama kicks off. So, Yelk and Sheriff Blackheart got into a duel. And the first thing that they did was point out their guns. Yelk fired his jelly bean shooter, but while he's doing that, he fires black shooter. Anyway, his deadly shooter, or his black shooter, struck Yelk. Yes, that's right. I said it clearly. It struck Yelk. Anyway. So, but had Yelk really died, or did he live? Let's find out. Yelk was feeling unconscious. His family rushed over. Well, looks like I win the fight, Blackheart said. Maybe not yet. Just shut up, said Yelka. Yelk, honey, are you okay? Yelka said. I think I am doing good, Yelk said. Who's there? It's me, Yelka. Oh. Well, I'm here, honey. But Yelk was actually able to survive. Looks like my buying days are over, so please send me away. No, don't hang up on us. Yelk was thinking, but his thinking was utterly disturbed due to the bullet being hit by him. Well, and so that was the final word Yelk spoke. And he passed. No, he didn't pass away, but he passed to silence. However, they ultimately decided to. At this point, this is where the story becomes useless. We've literally waited all this time, and Yelk nearly died. And this is the most bullcrap. This is the most garbage story I've ever heard of. Okay, I'm just teasing. But you know, this story. What do you think of this story? Is it garbage, trash, rubbish? Well, actually, don't think of it like that. Think of positive things. Like, don't trash my works, because I work hard on these things. Anyway, but now we're gonna shift it. I'm gonna shift to much more serious tone. Then they decide to head on home, and so their quest remained uncompleted. And so his horse carried him for miles. After 3 months, after 3 months of traveling, they finally came back into Yelksville. But at that point, the news had broke out that Yelk had died. So, how's Yelk doing? And Yelka had tears in her eyes. Well, he's dead. Really? Oh, well, that is pretty sad, so I should cry about this moment. Anyway, they soon had a funeral for Yelk. However, while they were having the funeral, they heard a lot of noises coming in the distance. The desert was very sensitive, full of noises that could echo thousands of miles away. And so for all these noises, they had heard the bandits and the residents of Shadyville coming up once again. Basically, at that point, this is where the real climax happens. At this point, Yelk was starting to feel a little conscious again, and he hadn't really died, so they practically spread false information and just made things. They practically lied, and that's like false. And also just don't make assumptions about people, even when they're asleep. Anyway, so at that point, the climax really kicks into this story. We basically learn how the world will end, or maybe will end. Well, maybe not in an apocalyptic way, but in a crime-filled way, since there was always crime in Yelksville. And if they ultimately won all of this, since they were the ones causing all the trouble and chaos, then this would be where the crime would fully end. Anyway, at that point, so we've already talked about the climax now, and now this is the part where things get intense. People started getting angry at the raiders. We'll call them raiders because why not? But basically, they were the ones that invaded the town. And so that they invaded the town, they decided to have a big fight. Maybe even a war, in fact, but more like a battle, since this war was not gonna last for an incredibly long time. It was only just one-on-one. Anyway, soon they eventually started attacking, and it's pretty similar to that of the 2 trilogy. They had a bit of kung fu in there, but not much kung fu, more like combat stances, since kung fu in a western style just doesn't really seem to fit in with cultural norms. Anyway, so they fought in combat stances. Anyway, and this is where the jelly bean shooters were fired. The only reason why the bad guys had some deadly weapons is because they grabbed some of their own. However, they did have a weakness, and that they only work after 1 bullet. So they had to work very hard and to literally get them in 1 strike. Kind of like this. Anyway. But at this point, the fight had officially begun. Sheriff Sam was finally left and right. And Yelk was starting to feel conscious again. He was about half conscious at this point, but he still needed time to recover. Anyway, so now the fight's going on. Yelka and Yelk's family are fighting one by one. They're fighting left and right. Anyway, I actually won't get too much into the fight sequences, but basically they had this long battle and it lasted for quite hours. Then, at one point, Yelk was feeling conscious again. He sat up, and then and at this point, he could talk and walk again. But before he did that, Sheriff Sam pointed out, "Hey, there's Yelk again," and everyone cheered for him. Yelk was still sort of weak, but he was still in fighting action, and so he finally got up, and that's where the fight began. This is where he came in, and that's where his heroicness, his heroic attitude kicked in. He hadn't really felt much heroic since over the last 3 months, since he had been asleep. However, and while he was hungry, he was always fed food. He was unconscious, but he was a bit conscious enough to actually eat some food and drink water. Nonetheless, Yelk was feeling much more better now, and he decided to go into the action and wipe out all the bandits and the thieves. Then, this is where the epic finale ends. At this point, all the bandits had been gone. There was now 1 left. At this point, it was Sheriff Blackheart that was still standing. Sheriff Blackheart didn't have a weapon, so Yelk wrangled him up, and he put him in jail. And the other bandits did not die, but they were all locked up in jail. And thus, the crime in Yelksville and the crime across all the Jelly Bean universe had officially ended. Yelk himself had truly saved the day, and probably but definitely with some help from his other friends too. He felt pretty proud now. Anyway, however, the jail was not large enough to fit. However, the jail was probably not a good idea. Instead, they decided to build not a crematorium. I was thinking that, but that would be a little too dark. But basically, they built this massive jail soon after, and that's where prisoners were held. They were held very far away, so far away that they could not escape, and if they tried to escape, they would be hunted down, and they were hunted down by horses. It was practically impossible. Even the strongest person would still get caught, and they would still have to face a very severe punishment. Anyway, as the months went on, Yelk and his family decided to... But basically, after that, Sheriff Sam said to him, "Yelk, I'm pretty proud of you. But look at this mess we have now. We gotta clean it all up." And so Yelk was absolutely right. They definitely had to clean it up, because they couldn't leave it like a mess. You can't leave a town like a messy room, you know? Anyway, so they decided to repair Yelksville once and for all. There was a lot of things that were damaged, from the windows to the wood. Practically everything was almost damaged. However, the one thing that was not damaged was their souls themselves. They were still lively and had optimistic attitudes wherever they went. Anyway, over the months and the weeks to come, they slowly built the town one by one. First, most of all came the sheriffs, which was the most important thing, and then soon after the jail, and then the bank. The sheriff's building was a brown building, and that was the building that had been damaged the most. And the second most damaged was the jail, and the third most damaged was the bank. It was honestly unclear why the bandits decided to outrun the sheriff's office. Maybe they did this because they expressed extreme violence and mishandling towards authority figures like sheriffs. However, they did not do this to their mayor, Sheriff Blackheart. As for Sheriff Blackheart, he was ultimately locked up, and all the prisoners and all the bad guys were locked up for the rest of their lives, never to be seen again, and always isolated from the world. All the prisoners were stuck in one by one prison cells. It was only them, and it was like an insane asylum. They were given food, but they could not talk to one another, which would make things profoundly depressing. Basically, imagine that if you tried to do that in real life. I could not really survive. I don't think anyone out there could really survive that. Anyway, but the prisoners had long and toilful days, and they had those days until they died. And that took many years. It took many years, but went quite quickly because they soon were underfed, and they did not have much to even spare in their lives. They were practically poor, and that was what the Shadyville residents got most. It was ultimately what they got, and that was what they got and what they deserved. This was a clear time in which Yelk characters got what they deserved, and one in which Caleb Burnett characters, and a Caleb Burnett story in which characters got what they deserved. This was a clear moment of that. As for Yelksville, the town was ultimately cleaned up and repaired. At that point, there was not much left to do. The production was a group-based effort, and some groups worked on specific buildings. For example, Yelk and Yelka worked heavily on the sheriff's office, but they also worked on things like the bank and the jail. As well, prisoners from the jail of Yelksville were also free at that point, but not the Shadyville one. Instead, the Shadyville village, they stayed there for the rest of their lives. But for Yelksville, they were all free because Sheriff Sam soon determined that they did not intentionally cause any problems. Instead, they were given a second chance at life, and soon after, no one became a prisoner in Yelksville, and there was practically no more prisoners ever. Well, except for Shadyville. But practically Yelksville, Goldsville, Brownsville, and Silversville. Things were officially peaceful at that point. Anyway, the town production and the town repair eventually finished up, and it was time for a grand reopening of Yelksville. Well, Sheriff Sam said, we should be really proud of all of our work. And so they definitely were. All the residents, all the kids, all the teenagers, all the adults, all the elderly, all the shopkeepers, they were all very proud. But the one person they were proud of the most was Yelk himself. Anyway, I'd like to have a toast to Yelk, Sheriff Sam said. And Yelk, would you like to give a speech? And Yelk was very thrilled and felt very confident to give a speech. Well, Yelk said, I have come a long way into receiving this honor. Yelksville can clearly not function without me. So I know how much you depend on me. And I know how much that this means to you. I know that times were a little rough for me over the last 6 months from the epic journey, but now we're officially finished, and now it is springtime. Anyway, while it is getting relatively much more warmer, we have come a long way into where we've come now. Over our 70-year history, we've been through a lot of crimes, but here, we may call it a second age of Yelksville, an age in which we are free from toilness. We are free from crime. And that is like the greatest gift that we have ever gotten. With all the bandits and with all the evil done in the world, and completely vanished, turning and gone. There is now no enemies in this world. Jelly beans from all across the world can do whatever they please. Well, of course not some, well, except for bad things. But you know, they have free will. And if they have free will, that means that they have freedom itself. And Yelk spoke on, talking about how all the jelly beans had their own freedom now. They always had freedom, but never as much freedom now, since with all the evil being done in the world. And with all the evil done in the world, there came a lot more celebrations. Anyway, after Yelk had finished his speech, Sheriff Sam said, "Thank you, Yelk. as well. I will have a profoundly important thing to show you. And so, Yelk stood still. And from there, this is where the sheriff gave him a new badge. This was called the Special Hero Award. And the Special Hero Award was practically the same as the Hero Badge. But the Special Hero Badge, this was a much more metallic and much more larger and grandiose model of the Hero Badges. Yelk felt, Sheriff Sam and Yelk thought that this was the reward that Yelk had really deserved the most. After all, it made perfect sense. Yelk was indeed a profound hero, and he had always been dreaming about helping others. He had always been dreaming of being someone big. And he knew that he was big already. Over the 40 years he had been alive. Well, actually, he's been alive for around 50 years, but he had always been incredibly young. And he had always been young, in a sense, in which that his character had never really grown old. And since his character never grew old, he became a timeless person in all of Yelksville. In all of Yelksville, he was practically the perfect model of what a jelly bean citizen could be. He was incredibly nice, and that was his profound quality. Overall, this made Yelk incredibly special, and no one could take that away from him. Anyway, Yelk was then awarded a round of applause, profoundly loud applauses, since this was the first time that anyone ever had actually gotten the award. And Yelksville was extremely proud of Yelk, and they eventually came with a new idea, and they had enough money to make an expansion called Yelk Park. Not a theme park, but a park dedicated to Yelk and his great name, the hero in which he became. And that was the greatest journey of Yelk. That was the journey of how he became a well-acclaimed cowboy. After Yelk Park had opened, there came a big dinner, and Yelk was of course invited, as well as his horse and his pup also made appearances, but their most restrained due to them being animals. Anyway, but it was a profound night for Yelk and his family. Yelk was once again awarded, and at that point he became the most awarded cowboy ever. He's won over 200,000 awards ever since he became a cowboy in the 1910s. And since then he's had a career of profound success. After the dinner, everyone gave him a big round of applause, and they invited him to spend some activities. After a pretty long night, it was time for Yelk and his family to go to bed. Yelk tucked in his brother and his son and daughter into bed. He first talked to his son, saying, "Son, you must feel pretty proud of me, because I've achieved so much. And this is the life that I wanted to live." And the son agreed. Yes, you have," Yelk Jr. said. And little Missy also agreed. She said, "Yes, Father, you are a profound person." after that, after all that was said and done, Yelk then talked to Yelka, and for Yelka, he said, "Honey, I think you're more excited." "I bet you do," Yelka said. And so they slowly gave each other a kiss. I know, it was gross. And they turned off the lights and went to sleep. And crime was officially over. Everything was peaceful once and for all. And no one could disturb the peace of Yelksville. And no one could tarnish the name of Yelk. Yelk the Orange Jelly Bean Cowboy. And no one could tarnish or destroy his reputation, because he himself had built the most profound and the most successful career ever, and all in Yelksville. I bet you enjoyed this film, and I feel pretty proud now. I've made over 5 feature films, and soon this will be my 6th feature film to be released. Whenever I make these feature films, I feel so much more inside, like big achievements. And that's why I feel like I am, a big achievement. Maybe one day I'll be in the Hall of Fame. But who knows how long it could last for. There could always be more people out there. But I feel I have lived quite a lot of life. And my life has been very productive. Anyway, enough talking about me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this film. After all, I am the solo creator of this film, Caleb Burnett. And I hope you have a nice evening, and I hope you take care. Sincerely, Caleb Burnett. And now the credits will roll, and the characters will be shown.